It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice right here, right now. Well, we got some hefty stuff to cover this morning. Got to tell you, man, we're in a mess here. You're joining us live on our website. That's great news. Glad to see you folks out there this morning. I see Tacoma out there. I see Baltimore. I see Baton Rouge. I've seen you folks from Baton Rouge every once in a while. Lincoln, Nebraska. I see Chicago out there. And Texas, Florida. I see California out there. I see folks out there in Forney. I think that's Texas. So good morning, and thank you very much for joining us. I see some folks out there in the Midwest as well, and we're always glad to have you folks on board. I appreciate your catching us live every morning on AVN. If you are watching us or listening to us on Patriot FB, glad to have you folks on board as well. If you're listening to this show on Big Country 99, this is a pre-recorded version. We broadcast live 8 to 10, so thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to catch the program live, you can do so at 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Monday through Friday, and you can listen right here on americasvoicenow.org. You can either watch it or listen to it, your preference. So, yesterday afternoon, the president came out and announced a new budget, if you want to call it that. I wouldn't call it that because that would be a misnomer. What he actually proposed was a brand new $8.3 trillion increase in our debt and a $1.8 trillion tax increase. Yeah. Now, I'll grant you that's over the course of the next decade. And as everyone knows, first of all, he was late a month, which is illegal. But just another sign of how Congress and the presidency and the executive and legislative treat the law as if it's their own personal loophole jumping rope. But more importantly, this is over the course of a decade, and everyone knows that the president's budget is a joke. No one follows it. It's not expected to be one that will actually be adopted. And, to be honest with you, it flies directly in the face of the budget deal that they just cut only 2 months ago. It increases the spending over and above that, which is what he just agreed to. So the joke is, I guess it's on us. I don't know. At this point, folks, I'm so perplexed as to how this whole how the whole Titanic is remaining afloat. I mean, it's just ridiculous. We're so far underwater at this stage in the game, and one of the things I'm going to talk about in our later segment is the fact that when we look here at, I posted an article up about how the global super rich are eyeing office blocks over mansions that, as an investment for their money. And they're talking about the fact that there's $20 trillion, as their collected value. And it's not that I care about the lives of the rich and famous. I couldn't care less. But what I wanted to post this for, and I put my commentary above it, is that the alternative way to look at this is to recognize that if the global super rich only have a collected value of $20 trillion, that should alert you to the impossibility of being able to pay off a debt which right now is $17.4 trillion just for the United States alone. And that's only the immediate debt that we have. That's not the long-term debt for the uncovered mandates that we have through all of these entitlements. If you look at that debt, it's in addition to the $17 trillion, and it's another $200 trillion. So in other words, folks, let's understand it this way. If you were to sit there and take the wealth of every person that is considered super wealthy in the world, we would barely be able to pay off just our national debt. Forget the rest of the planet. We'd have to confiscate the wealth of everyone who's classified as super rich in order just to pay off our own debt. And that wouldn't even begin to tap into the 200 trillion that we have we have no money for. I mean, this is insane. Anyone who thinks this bubble cannot or will not burst is fooling themselves. Really. Our second topic this morning is going to be the defense and the Pentagon and how they are injecting the hoax of climate change into their planning and into their policies. Now, the problem I have with that, of course, is fairly easy to recognize. If you're going to create a national path of action and you're going to create budgets and develop the planning and the strategy of how you're going to protect and defend your nation, and not only domestically but internationally, and you're going to inject something which is as fantastically unreal as unicorns into the mix, you can't possibly come out with a number at the end or a plan at the end that makes any sense. And injecting something like climate change into our national defense policy is tantamount to treason, because it's building a project plan on false information that everyone acknowledges now is false, except for these idiots up in the executive and the Congress that pretend that even though there's mountains of evidence out there discrediting the climate change hoax that's been perpetrated on America, not to mention what's the evidence sitting right outside your front door. I mean, this is absurd. It really is. It's not absurd, it's embarrassing, and frankly, it's dangerous. This is treasonous activity on the part of the Pentagon to do this. And I got to tell you, the DOD, Department of Defense, and the Pentagon, in addition to that, they have been, so adamant about injecting false reality into the planning of how they go about determining what they're going to do to protect and defend the country. We're building expectations that don't exist. And since their sole function, their primary directive, their prime directive as an existence is to defend the nation, injecting climate change into that and calling it a threat multiplier that will affect, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it, but injecting that as an argument that climate change, causes poverty around the world, and of course that prompts terrorism, is it's just a flat-out lie. And I don't know about you, but I've had enough of it. I've had enough of lies, and I've had enough nonsense. Our third topic is a very interesting one. There's a story published this morning in the New York Times about how the CIA has been caught spying on the aides for the Senate Intelligence Committee that's actually investigating the CIA. You've got to be kidding me. No, I'm not. The CIA spied on staff members of the Senate Intelligence Committee that was investigating the CIA for their detention program, an illegal program where they were detaining individuals and hauling them off to foreign countries where they could interrogate them without, anyone knowing about it. And I got to tell you, folks, you've heard the song from Pink Floyd called The Dogs of War. I've played it before. These people and the secrets of this agency and the Senate Oversight Committee and how they're dealing with it as a secret, it just goes to show you how complex the web is that these traitors have weaved. And I have to tell you, I don't trust a single player in this game. Not a single one. The person, believe it or not, who is leading the charge on, part of this investigation is none other than Feinstein herself. And the level of betrayal here is so far, it's not tantamount to treason, folks. It's beyond treason. It's beyond treason. They may couch themselves and swear up and down that they're actually doing this to protect and defend the United States of America. And I'm here to tell you, nothing is further from the truth. Okay, our fourth topic this morning is going to be based on the perfecta of home defense weaponry. And I'm going to tell you why. We are reaching a point where it's clear, it should be clear to everyone right now, that we have reached an impasse at which we can no longer believe that one, and all you got to do is look at this budget from Obama and look at the traitors in Congress, the traitors in the judiciary and the judgeships, and how they're supporting and defending that which is inexcusable. The complete, flat-out, and utter betrayal of the executive. And you don't have to be, you don't have to have a political science degree to see where this is going. You don't have to be an economist from Harvard to see where this is going. You don't have to be a study of totalitarianism to see where this is headed. And you don't have to be a prepper either. But you do have to recognize that we are rapidly reaching a point in which this kind of weaponry is going to be almost a mandatory requirement for every home. In fact, it's way beyond that. You should have this now. What you're seeing going on in Connecticut, in New York, and Maryland, and other states where they have injected and incorporated complete and utter destruction of the Second Amendment principles, tells you that you should be working towards making sure that you have the wherewithal and the means to defend yourself and your family. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my opinions on what weaponry and calibers are ideal for home defense and resistance. All right, let's get into our first topic, because we'll run out of time if we don't, quite honestly. Obama's new $8.3 trillion budget. He's incorporating that as new debt. That's just the debt, people. And on top of that, he's trying to offset that with hikes in taxes by $1.8 trillion. Now, this is a joint analysis by the Republicans on the Senate and the House Budget Committee. So, they'll claim the numbers are high. It doesn't really matter. When we're talking about this kind of money, $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there, it doesn't really make a difference. Even if the Democrats turn around and scream up and down, it's not 8.3 trillion, it's 7.1. I mean, it's a joke. You can't have new debt incorporated into a debt that's already in excess of $17.4 trillion and expect that at any given time this nation is ever going to be able to pay that off. Obama came out and said, these kids may not be the most excited people in town on budget day. He was talking to some schools. But my budget is designed with their generation and future generations in mind. What he was trying to say is how his budget is designed to enhance their lives. What he really meant was that it was designed with how they're going to be responsible to pay off that which no one can pay off. He said his budget will make, quote, smart investments. Investment, by the way, is code word for the giant sucking sound of money from your pocket. And these smart investments will address global warming, which, again, I'm going to talk about it again. Look out your door. Look at the hoax of global warming and climate change. Look at the discredited scientists, the politicians, those who are profiting from it, the profiteers of global warming. And ask yourself this question: does it exist, or am I being played for a fool? The whole idea of cap and trade and carbon tax and all of that nonsense, all of that is code word or code for another way to siphon the resources away from the middle class of America. The reason why that resources have to be siphoned from you is very simple. When you're broke, you cannot defend and fight back. You cannot resist when you cannot afford food and ammunition and medical supplies for your family. That's the goal, folks. Make no mistake about it. The position that and the direction that we are headed is diametrically opposed to your benefit. He wants to provide, quote, preschool for all. That, ladies and gentlemen, is code word for early indoctrination. They're not satisfied that they've got your kids in kindergarten through 12th grade. Now they want to have preschool so that they can begin to indoctrinate them at an even earlier age, because it sets the stage to jack with the minds of generations. If you think for a moment, and of course, you know, if you're a parent who's struggling and you're a single mom and you're trying to make ends meet, you know, you're thinking to yourself, wow, preschool would allow me to start work a year earlier and maybe get out there into the workforce and drag myself above the poverty level. Well, let me tell you something. Johnson was the start of the war on poverty. We have spent over $1 trillion on the war on poverty, and we are below the poverty levels that existed at the time that the war began. It is a complete and utter epic failure. There is no way that what they are breeding is dependency. They're not breeding a solution to the war on poverty. They are expanding poverty, if anything. And they're doing so at an enormous expense to the nation. That $1 trillion that was expended came out of the pockets of those who are working. And it's been squandered, like throwing your pearls before swine. To make matters worse, the reality of it is that the $1 trillion never made it to the poor. You see, these guys are on a par with like UNICEF, where only 12 cents out of every dollar ever actually makes it to the people that you're allegedly feeding in over some country where they show you a picture on TV of a little kid with his belly distended and beg for money, and you hand it over to them, and 60% is gobbled up on advertising and administrative costs, and then the other 20% is gobbled up on the budgets and the income for those people who work there, and 12 or 15, maybe 20 cents makes it to the poor kid who hasn't eaten in a week. It's the same scam, just with the government's stamp of approval and label on it. It's no different than any of the other charity scams that have been perpetrated across the ages on Americans, or any other culture for that matter. Preschool for All is an early indoctrination program. You should call it what it is, recognize it for what it is, and avoid it like the plague. If your children are currently in school today and Common Core is being implemented in your state, my best advice to you is withdraw them from school and homeschool them. Because what they're having siphoned into their minds, and when I say siphoned, it's not a trickle. It's being forced in at a fire hose torrent rate. Is globalization, indoctrination to be an automaton, a cog in the wheel of the worst treason that's ever been perpetrated on a people. See, we were the freest country. Now we're shortly going to be the most enslaved. Why? Well, when other countries enslave people, take a look at, Mugabe or somebody like that. The country has no wealth to begin with. The people don't have any work to begin with. 80% of the country is unemployed. So when you take over a country like that and siphon the wealth off, you're only hurting. There's only 20% of the people working anyway. In a country like this, where you have a much higher rate and level of employment, and production and the resources are much greater, you have a totally different game. Because now it's not a fixed finite set of resources that you can draw from until it's just depleted. Now you have an ongoing source, and the resource is not the natural resources, it's your labor. It's your effort. It's your sweat. It's your tears. It's your blood. He goes on to say that in this budget, he's going to ensure that the wealthy are, quote, paying their fair share. Well, let me tell you the truth of this issue. For the wealthy to pay their fair share would require, and I posted an article up about this, which I mentioned earlier, in order for that to happen, the global super rich, which have a collected value of $20 trillion, would have to have every penny stolen and absconded from them. Every single penny without fail. There's an article in Yahoo that's global super rich eye office blocks over mansions as their wealth hits $20 trillion. So think about it for a moment. How is it that he can ensure that the wealthy are paying their fair share when already they probably, and I don't know these statistics off the top of my head. I've gone over them many, many times over the years. But, the top 10% pay, 80% of all the bills. How much more fair share can they pay? Unless you start skimming the 401ks, the retirement accounts of every American. And if you don't think that's what's coming, kids, let me tell you something. You're in for a rude awakening. What this budget does is it exposes this administration for the treasonous, betrayal-laden, confiscatory executive and Congress that we have. Washington has become enemy number one of the people. Make no mistake about it, and ignore it at your own risk and at your own peril. We're going to take a break. When we return, we're going to tackle our second topic this morning, the issue of the defense and the defense budget and their planning and the climate change hoax and how that all interplays to essentially destroy any possibility that this nation can ever properly defend itself. And we're going to also talk a little bit about our global visage on the world stage. We'll be back in just a minute. You're listening to America's Voice right here, right now.